Hey man, welcome back to the 50 Nifty United States. Let's talk about Colorado. Just kidding, we're not going to make this all about that, but I think we know that that's what you were thinking, right? Let's roll Colorado up and inhale it in all of its glory. Colorado, being abbreviated with CO, is a pretty large state found in the region that we often just call the West, or more specifically, the Mountain West. Its capital city is Denver, with the nickname the Centennial State. Their flag looks like this. This. There are 64 counties, and surprisingly, they aren't just a whole bunch of even squares. It has a population of around 6 million as of 2025. No US presidents come from this state, and it was admitted to the Union in August of 1876, making it the 38th state. The fact that this is 100 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence is where it gets its nickname, the Centennial State. And as usual, it's time to look at the borders. Wow, as you can see, it truly has some of the most interesting borders on the entire planet. The region encompassing the state we now call Colorado has been controlled by France, Spain, Mexico, the Republic of Texas, and of course the United States. The eastern half was actually part of the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, which was separated from Spanish Mexico due to the mighty Rocky Mountains running down the middle here. Prior to the growth of the English settlers, it was mostly occupied by many indigenous tribes, including the Navajo, the Cheyenne, the Kiowa, the Ute, and many others. This would remain as such until this little treaty, known as Guadalupe Hidalgo, from 1848 would see the other half of the modern borders hit US territory. Now what exactly was the significance of that? Well, it ended the Mexican-American War, which meant about 55% of Mexico's former territory was now in the hands of the United States. That treaty was named after a city that the Mexicans fled against US advancement, and the nation's borders now went all the way to the Pacific, acquiring all of these states. Man, what a war. Finally, there would be peace, right? After acquiring all of this land, the creation of Kansas and later Utah would see today's Colorado into their states right around the former Rockies divider, but the Pikes Peak gold rush that lasted until 1860 saw a boom in population along the Rockies, mostly male miners. And since the capitals of those two states were so far away from the populations, a delegate was elected to Congress to request a new territory. But as you might have guessed, this was met with some issues, as much of the population was Republican, and the early 1860s saw a little bit of political tension, you might say. Because of that, Congress took so long to act on the request, and folks decided they'd just take things into their own hands. So, for almost 2 years, it was called the Jefferson Territory, and it elected officials and drew borders that were considered illegitimate, if you can believe it. Unfortunately, by 1860, the population was less than the required 40,000 residents needed to opt for statehood, and President Buchanan decided Jefferson Territory no longer existed, and he drew up what he called Colorado Territory in 1861. Named after the Colorado River that takes origin within this new territory, reflecting what we see today. The Civil War would halt any desires for statehood until about a decade later in 1876, and said borders would be defined by Kansas's western border after it became a state in 1861, and that had its own little batch of troubles that I'll save for the Kansas episode. The rest of its borders, well, honestly, since so much of this region is wide open, a lot of it was drawn out of what they call border equality, making Colorado and many of its neighbors have such flat borders. The northern border was supposed to be the 42nd parallel, matching the 1790 agreement between England and Spain over American land. But thanks to this so-called border equality, Congress dropped it 1 degree to ensure that the state gets 4 total degrees, matching Wyoming and Montana, and it's also why these little steps here exist. Looking back at New Mexico's border, Congress set the line at the 37th parallel, ignoring the Hispano population of San Luis Valley now being cut, and caused issues with them all for the sake of having a straight line, which Delegate Francisco Pariah was not a fan of, and the Santa Fe Weekly News stated, "Although clean-cut borders were pleasing to the eye, the border setting between New Mexico and Colorado did a disservice to the local population of Hispanos." To which the government basically said, "F you." Surveyors have disputed this literally ever since. Even as recently as 2013, northeastern Colorado commissioners started a movement for it to become its own state, but alas, the state constitution recognizes only the borders that date back to 1876. While physical geography clearly got ignored during the border drawings, it does not get ignored by me. So despite being classified as one of the mountain states, only about half of Colorado's territory falls within the actual Rocky Mountain ranges. The majority of the southern part of the Rockies is what engulfs half of the state, giving way to the Colorado Plateau as well as the Colorado Piedmont. More on those in just a bit. Within the Rockies, the mountain ranges alternate between high peaks and massive valleys, giving way to canyons. Specifically, it has the most elevation points above 14,000 feet out of any US state, with its highest peak being Mount Elbert in the Sawatch Range, coming in at 14,440 feet above sea level. This is also the second highest point in the entire continental US and the highest point in the Rockies. In fact, the Sawatch makes up what's considered the core of the Rockies and is the highest part of them. Some of the other ranges that fall within this include Front Range, the Medicine Bow, the Park Range, and Rabbit Ear Range. But we can't overlook the plateaus, including the San Juan Range, which is volcanic and heavily dissected by ice. Much of it's also sitting above 14,000 feet. In the south central part sits the Sangre de Cristo Range, showing some of the largest sand dunes in interior North America, and outside of the massive mountains is where you'll find the Piedmonts. These are rather hilly and quite beautiful, somewhat crammed between all of those mountains and the flatter plains that make up a lot of the eastern half of the state. It's where you'll find most of the state's urbanization, its universities, industry, and of course most of its population. Streams from the mountains often broaden valleys here, attracting farmers. However, looking at the Eastern Plains region, much of it is the exact opposite, being rather scarce in water, and the rivers are known to dry up for parts of the year. Much of this land is extremely flat in contrast to its western counterparts, with only gentle rolling hills from time to time, showing some short grass vegetation over limestone and sandstones. If not for the lack of water, the layered soil would make it pretty arable. But speaking of water, let's talk about rivers. So the Rockies are where the Colorado River originates, and because of how much precipitation they see, it provides water for many states as well as some parts of Mexico. This drainage pattern is dictated by the Rockies, forming what's known as the Continental Divide, with the regions west of it often being called the Western Slope. Moreover, the White River rises here and runs to the west into Utah, being a tributary of the Green River in its neighboring state. Within the San Juan Mountains, you can find the top of the Rio Grande, which is one of the longest rivers in all of North America, also forming the border with Texas and Mexico at 1,900 miles. Should you recall the Arkansas episode, the Arkansas River takes origin in the Rockies, running all the way through to the Ozarks, and you can see the South Platte River originating here before it hooks up into Nebraska, meeting its north counterpart. Highways! As always, these are pretty straightforward. I-70 cuts across the state horizontally, going through the capital of Denver into the Rockies towards Aspen, just before exiting into Utah.
Huh. I expected the Rocky Mountains to be a little rockier than this.
This is actually one of the only interstates to go into the Rockies, thus it meets up in Denver with I-25 coming from the north and I-76 from the northeast. Speaking of Denver, I guess it's time we talk about the cities. Capital City is indeed the largest one, so we're going to go ahead and start there. Denver's nickname is the Mile High City because of its elevation being exactly 1 mile above sea level. It can be found on the South Platte River Valley on the edge of the High Plains and was named after John Denver. No, I'm just kidding. It was named after James Denver, the governor of the Kansas Territory when this was established during the Gold Rush era. If you were paying attention, this would make perfect sense to you. Now get this, the line known as the 105th Meridian west of Greenwich passes right through this Union Station, and that's where the Mountain Time Zone begins. Now obviously the state capitol is a sight worth seeing, with free tours during the week, adorned with stained glass and paintings inside of every president between George Washington and George Bush by Lawrence Williams. The way this is positioned makes it sit higher than most of the city, allowing the sun to set behind it in the backdrop of the Rockies, and you can also see the dome from the Molly Brown House Museum. Now who was Molly Brown? Well, considered a progressive at the time, she was big on reforming the justice system and did a lot of work for building playgrounds. Further, she was a Titanic survivor and assisted in getting a lot of other women onto lifeboats. From her house, you can also see the Cathedral of Immaculate Conception, but for the plant lovers, Denver not only has the Grow House, a hydroponic and aquaponic farm stressing sustainability, but also has several outdoor attractions such as the Denver Urban Gardens. Denver Urban Gardens, I'm not shooting that take again. Moreover, you can actually take a ride on the Denver Trolley to see the South Platte Greenway as a scenic open-air experience, as well as the 4-mile historic park, which has lots of open grounds and the city's oldest house. Denver is really known for its women's progressive movements, with a history museum around the subject, and the 5 Points historic walking tour depicts stories around buildings that show how the city's African American community evolved. Speaking of these cultural things, this is a city very big on music, and it has its own festival every year simply called the Colorado Music Festival. This is held at the Chautauqua Auditorium, made entirely out of wood every summer. But for the sports fans, it's also the home of the Empower Field at Mile High, home of the Denver Broncos, as well as the Ball Arena as home of the Denver Nuggets. Now this is a bit of a different type of arena, but the Red Rocks Amphitheater is right on the outskirts of Denver, hosting all sorts of events around physical activity and actual concerts. Though if I'm being honest, I've heard that this is more about the allure of the place itself, as the acoustics are said to be not very good. What stuck out to me is the fact that they have a beer spa known as Oakwell. Speaking of which, the Fiction Beer Company is supposed to be a solid tap room, as well as the Family Jones Distillery and the Colorado Cider Company. Its hubs for nightlife are East Colfax Avenue and South Broadway for those that like to partay. Its more important university may simply be Denver University, and with that, let's move to another city. So staying along the Rocky Mountains, you'll find the second most populous city, Colorado Springs. It's actually the most extensive city in the state, found in El Paso County, with a pretty arid feel due to its location in the steppes. By the 1870s, it saw such a huge amount of English settlement that for a while it was called Little London. Much of this would probably follow the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, and Pikes Peak is actually one of the things Colorado Springs is really well known for. This is in the mountain summit near the city, named after the American explorer Zebulon Pike, which is home to the Garden of the Gods. This is over 1,300 acres of public park space and has odd geological structures that took formation millions of years ago, made of red sandstone that gives it all sorts of unique shapes. Just north of the city, it may be known for the Air Force Academy, which is honestly just an impressive looking structure more than anything else, and when you look into the city itself, you'll be absolutely shocked to know that all of the attractions are around gold and mining. I mean, seriously, they've got the Pioneers Museum, the Western Museum of Mining and Industry, Molly Kathleen Gold Mine Tours, and yeah, I guess I'm finding that this is another place where most of its claims to the fame are around the city, not in it. And it seems to be fascinated with military history as a whole, specifically around aviation because of the Air Force Academy. There's actually a World War II aviation museum right by the airport, but I think here we can move forward. Some other slightly smaller but notable cities exist, such as Fort Collins. I'm finding quite quickly that a lot of the major cities in Colorado are like right in a line here. If its name didn't make this obvious, it was originally a military outpost established around 1864, found up near the top of the state by Wyoming. Perhaps it's a good place for those seeking out a nice, quiet, historic district, as its main row features a lot of 1800s housing. You may also have heard of Boulder, Colorado, which, if I'm being honest, is all but a suburb of Denver. But it is a cozy little spot, and this was founded around, you'll never guess, the Colorado Gold Rush in 1858. There is some darker lore here, as Thomas Aikens arrived in this county in 1858 and was invited to stay by the Arapaho leader Niwot for the winter. But settlers decided to abuse this and carried out what was known as the Sand Creek Massacre against those people about 5 years later. Gee, I would have never seen that one coming. Nonetheless, this place was erected in a canyon where it got its name from, and its Pearl Street Mall is a brick road old town. And I must say, the Dushanbe Tea House might be its most standout feature. Now, since we're on the topic of massacres, I do want to talk about one that is now a ghost town called Ludlow. It's basically empty now, but the Ludlow Massacre happened thanks to a mine strike, which came from the dangerous conditions of working in a mine. United Mine Workers of America strikers would first be evicted from the company homes with their families, a reason to never trust company towns, after demands were rejected by the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. This obviously led to some confrontations, and in 1914, escalations made the company call in the National Guard to break the strike, killing 21 people, 11 of which were children. This was instrumental in furthering child labor laws, so remember that the next time your weird working class colleagues want to act like unions are the problem. There's also a banger Woody Guthrie tune about this. There's a city simply called Centennial, named for the state's nickname, formed only in 2001, and some other notable ones include Thornton, Arvada, Pueblo, and Greeley. And with that, I think it's time to march forward. Now, we've already talked about several historic parks, since a lot of them are the draws of the cities we spoke about. And obviously, Rocky Mountain National Park is a huge one. This actually encompasses over 265,000 acres, and you get to see a lot of really thick forests composed heavily of evergreens, and there's even lodging in a lot of the places here. Don't miss the Trail Ridge Road being the highest continuous paved road in the United States. There's also the Mesa Verde National Park, which is tucked into cliff walls showcasing some ancient history around the Pueblo tribe. Grand Mesa is actually the largest flat-top mountain. Speaking of tribes, there are a couple native reservations within the state of Colorado, namely the Southern Ute Reservation, which is the second largest in the country, and the Ute Mountain Reservation. Further parks include some national forests like Rio Grande National Forest, San Juan National Forest, which has the Chimney Rock National Monument, and there's a glimpse of some super high sand dunes in the Great Sand Dune National Park, accompanied by four-wheeler trails. Now, we know the US isn't really known for its trains, but you can take a round-trip train ride through San Juan National Park called the Silverton Train. When we think of canyons, we often think of the Grand Canyon, but Colorado holds the Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park, which is a spectacle of black walls that shoot up several thousand feet, having been eroding for millions of years. These parks cover some of the state's most interesting natural anomalies, but Colorado is also home to the deepest hot spring in the world. This would be the Mother Spring found in the Pagosa Springs, surrounded by the San Juan Mountains. This is very rich in minerals, and of course it's got lots of spas nearby. On the other hand, the state's tallest waterfall would be the Bridal Veil Falls at 365 feet. That means if you climbed 1 foot per day, you would reach the top in exactly 1 year. Follow me for more math tips. There's a 2-mile hiking trail to take the entire scenery in, and a historic power plant at the top that used to fuel electricity to Telluride, the nearby town. Other falls include the Broadmoor 7, the Helen Hunt Falls, and the Rainbow Falls Historic Site. Now, with all these mountains, it shouldn't be a surprise that there's no shortage of caves, such as the Cave of the Winds at Manitou Spring. This is basically an amusement park, being a deep exploration that one can take a tour of in the Pikes Peak region. Glenwood Caverns has several excursions, such as the Yampa Spa and Vapor Cave, and there's even one called the Groaning Caves, being the state's longest one named for the noise it makes due to wind. Climate-wise, you can imagine it really depends on where you are in the state. Out in the flat grasslands of the east, much of the state is dry and sees little precipitation, having super hot summers where making your way up into the mountains will cause cooler temperatures year-round, and plenty of snowfall. Of course, the foothills experience a little bit of all this, and as you can imagine, this leaves a diverse population of animals. Primarily in the mountains, you can find American black bears, cougars, bighorn sheep, elk, and mountain goats, as well as moose. Over in the grasslands, you're more likely to encounter prairie dogs and kit foxes. Colorado may remind us of that sweet, sweet green plant, but their largest breweries would be the Oscar Blues Brewing and Odell Brewing. Believe it or not, the cheeseburger is said to originate here, as the first chef to add cheese to the already classic hamburger trademarked it, that being Louis Basalt of the Humpty Dumpty Drive-In in Denver around 1935. Yes, I know others have claimed to make this prior to that, but note the word trademarked. Other inventions from the state include the Crocs, the root beer float, Jolly Ranchers, before Hershey acquired that, and it's said that outdoor Christmas lighting goes back to a resident in 1914. Colorado has some interesting overlooked pieces of lore, including being the only state to ever turn down hosting the Olympics in November of 1972. It's also got more microbreweries per capita than any other state, and there's even an annual festival celebrating a, frozen body in Netherlands. This is because of a guy named Morstel who cryogenically froze himself in tough shed. If there are any foods that the state is known for, it might be the Olathe corn, named after a Colorado town, and it's said to have an exceptional amount of sweet taste compared to normal corn. Palisade peaches are known for basically the same thing, growing from a tree in this region, and there's actually a whole festival around those every year. What they call Colorado-style pizza looks something like this. Besides dispensaries, Colorado is big in the health and wellness industry, and they emphasize software and transportation. Obviously, it's got a deep history in mining, and the flatter areas hold a lot of agriculture. Famous folks from the state include Tim Allen, Trey Parker, as well as artists like Lumineers and Earth, Wind, and Fire. In terms of religion, Colorado is actually one of the lesser religious states. Some may attribute that to the higher levels of education. But there are a few counties where evangelical Christians do dominate, and it's somewhat known for being more religiously diverse, including Hispanic Catholics, Muslims, and Jews. Politically, Colorado has had a history of being a swing state, but in the 21st century has been pretty firmly blue. The latest election did see a small increase in Republican voters, but still sits as a majority Democrat-dominated state. And with that, we shall close this out. Thank you for taking a look at this giant box-shaped state and delving into the wonders with me beyond the first guys to legalize weed. What do you think about Colorado? Do you live there? Have you lived there before? Would you be interested in seeing Colorado? And which state would you like me to cover next? As always, please let me know down in the comments, and I shall see you next time.